welcome to India Tonight. I'm Sumita, Kareer, back with the show that deep dives into the biggest stories that are shaping our markets, economies, and geopolitics. So on the show tonight, we put the focus on 11 years of the Narendra Modi-led NDA government. It completes 11 years of being in power. The Bharatiya Janata Party has hailed this period as a quote-unquote a golden era of transformative governance, while the opposition calls it has been a time of unfulfilled promises. But let's take a closer look. Well, the Modi government highlights a decade of economic growth with India's GDP now at $4.2 trillion, positioning the nation to soon become the world's third largest economy. In fact, infrastructure has also seen a major push during these years, with operational airports rising from 74 in 2014 to now 160 today, and the government is planning to reach a number of 300 by 2047. The digital revolution, well, that's been driven by initiatives by UPI and the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile trinity. It's reshaped financial inclusion. In defense, modernization and self-reliance have been key, with a surge in exports and the launch of India's first indigenous aircraft carrier. The government is also taking pride in the national security milestones like Operation Sindoor and the abrogation of Article 370, alongside societal welfare schemes that are empowering women and marginalized communities. However, the opposition, that's led by Congress, it's painting a different picture. They accuse the government of weakening constitutional institutions. The opposition claims that promises like Achhe Din, they remain unmet. So as the debate rages on, the Modi government is launching a month-long campaign to spotlight its achievements, from hosting the G20 summit to pension reforms and much more. The big question we're asking on the show tonight, well, how much has India changed over these past 11 years economically, in policy terms, and the delivery of those promises, and what do these 11 years mean for India's future? We'll be joined by a stellar panel of guests in just a short while from now, but let's listen into some reactions that are coming in on Modi 3.0.
Policy paralysis एक कॉमन चीज बन गया था देश में. अंडर द लीडरशिप ऑफ प्राइम मिनिस्टर श्री मोदी, ये पॉलिसी पैरालिसिस हमने पूरा खत्म कर दिया. ये गवर्नमेंट अंडर द लीडरशिप ऑफ प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी, दिस इज द मोस्ट डिसिसिव गवर्नमेंट आफ्टर इंडिपेंडेंस. Even when they are having such a huge majority, better majority than Prime Minister Modi, the decisive government was not so active. Even they are not at all decisive rather. तो डिसिसिव निर्णायक सरकार नहीं थे. अभी हमारा सरकार निर्णायक सरकार है.
पूरे देश में नरेंद्र मोदी जी ने बेरोजगारी फैला रखी है. 2-3 अरबपतियों को ये पूरा का पूरा फायदा देते हैं. 25 सबसे बड़े अरबपतियों का इन्होंने 16 लाख करोड़ रुपए कर्जा माफ किया. नोटबंदी लागू की, गलत जीएसटी लागू किया, और जो देश को रोजगार देते थे, जो छोटे बिजनेस वाले थे, स्मॉल और मीडियम इंडस्ट्री थी, उनको सबको इन्होंने खत्म कर दिया. नतीजा ये है कि हिंदुस्तान में कहीं भी रोजगार नहीं मिल पा रहा है. नरेंद्र मोदी जी की सरकार रोजगार नहीं दे पाती है. ये सच्चाई है.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, to debate on the big issue tonight, I'm now joined by Karan Verma. He's an author and political analyst, and Gaura Sen Gupta. She's the chief economist at IDFC First Bank. Thank you very much, Gaura and Karan, for joining us here on India Tonight. Karan, my first question to you now. We can talk about inclusive reforms. We can talk about financial inclusion schemes. We can talk about the development of defense manufacturing, electronics manufacturing, laying down of highways. However, the one big question that's plagued both the governments, whether it is the Congress or it's the BJP, it's been related to job creation. So why has the government not been able to do when it comes to the employment issue, even though unemployment has gone down, and that's essentially what the World Bank estimate suggests, but this issue still persists? Why do you think that's the case and the BJP has not been able to do much in this regard?
So I don't agree with the assertion that the BJP has not been able to do much. The RBI report from last year said that in the last 10 years, 17.9 crore jobs have been added. And besides that, if we look at the periodic labor force survey, it put the unemployment last year to 3.1%, which was the lowest of the last 6 years. So I don't think, unemployment right now is that big a malice. It'll always be a question of people seeking out employment, better jobs, which is an upward tick for any economy. So the kind of, metro construction, road construction, airports coming up, we've seen that has a multiplier effect on jobs. So when we say that the infrastructure is growing, we don't have robots right now who are doing that infrastructure work. It's companies, it's contractors, it's labor forces. That's who are put to work for that. So I don't agree with that assertion. Having said that, of course, there's room for improvement and we have to change with the times. One of the areas where I would love to see the government invest more is perhaps AI, machine learning and automation, because that's going to be a very serious challenge to the jobs. I would love to see the government come up with a clear, coherent policy on that and perhaps a dedicated ministry to that, because that's going to be one of the challenges. But as you rightly put out, when we have doubling of airports, when we have road construction going up, the traditional, conventional, hard jobs are still very much intact. In fact, they've seen a greater growth. In fact, if I would talk about the wealth per household, that has increased massively. That's gone leaps and bounds ahead. And also we need some perspective here as to where we were. Right. I mean, we were at a stage where we have tap water connections and toilets in all villages. So we need to, take it step by step. Today, we've reached a place where we've given 12 crore toilets and 12 crore tap water connections.
Right.
Only then can you empower them for jobs and other things.
Right. 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 Karan and Gaurav, let me also welcome on the panel Mr. Sanjay Jha. He is, of course, a political commentator, politician, former national spokesperson of the Congress party. Mr. Jha, how do you respond to Karan's assertion about the fact that, manufacturing has taken off, infrastructure development is happening in the country. So definitely jobs are there. However, they've not really grown as significantly as they should. But before I let you answer, let me also quote some data that the government has released in 2024. IT services added over 2 lakh jobs, healthcare added over 1.47 lakh jobs, professional and commercial services added over 94,000 jobs, and the same is the number when it comes to the education sector. Would you agree with what Karan is saying and the fact that, enough jobs have been created perhaps?
Good evening. I think Karan is a very dear friend of mine. He has a difficult predicament here. And, it's an exercise in futility, but good luck to him. I want to make a couple of points here. Firstly, let's kind of accept the hard truth that we have failed in job creation. And there are a couple of reasons for it. Normally, you need a very strong GDP to be able to create jobs. There's a direct linkage between the two. And if you look at India's GDP after 2019, and, we factored in the COVID negative growth, but the truth is that on an average, we have barely reached 5% GDP growth over the last 6 years. And that's dismal. This whole talk about 4 trillion economy, etc. Any economist will tell you that's like saying that my child is 15 years today and in 5 years will be 20 years old. That's a natural chronological, shall we say, consequence of just being a big economy. And if you provide even basic level of output, you will reach a size. But look at the GDP the per capita income of Japan, which is, by the way, an economy which has been in a slowdown, whose per capita income is $34,000, while we are at $2,900. These are serious issues. Unfortunately, politicians do a lot of rhetoric. But let's get back to the jobs point. I think under Mr. Modi, there has been the complete destruction of this demographic dividend story. And I'm not going to give you anecdotal examples of PhDs and engineers and MBAs looking around for, very, very menial jobs in government. Unfortunate, but that's a hard reality. The truth is you needed a robust GDP and you needed a very strong manufacturing. Now, my friend Karan talked about infrastructure. Well, fair enough. They have made some infrastructural investments. But ask anybody who knows the nitty-gritties of infrastructure development. Is capital intensive. It doesn't create jobs. The biggest technological change is happening even in manufacturing. It's not just in software or AI. So the truth is that you actually are going to face an increasing challenge irrespective of which government comes in. But Mr. Modi's government has not done well in manufacturing at all. All the hype China plus one never really happened. This whole production linked scheme did not create jobs. And honestly, if you look at the contribution of manufacturing in India's GDP, it's actually gone down to nearly 13.5% to 14%. So the Make in India was just a hollow hyperbole, meaning practically nothing on the ground, which brings you to the core point. How will this change? And really, for that to change, you need an economy that runs on a high level of acceleration and not on hollow policy making. I think the problem in India, one reason that a lot of people don't talk about, is the elephant in the room. But as a politician, I will put it on the table and listen to Gaura and Karun all over again, is the whole fear of what I call is the tax terrorism culture in India. You still have industrialists. I live in Mumbai. I can tell you with 100% confidence, who do not believe that they are safe if there's even a minor regulatory violation. So there is worry from the ED, income tax, CBI story, which is not just at politicians.
Right, Mr. Jha, you've touched upon very many points. Right, We'll come to some of those points, Mr. Jha. You've made your point and you've brought about several points when it comes to manufacturing. You've also spoken about infrastructure development. You've also spoken about AI. Now, AI is not just being developed in India. AI is a global phenomena. And of course, several ratings agencies and economists across the globe have spoken about the fact that AI is going to lead to job creation. However, there is a valid point to be made when it comes to how is the government really dealing with that specter of job losses that is going to come about as a result of technological revolution. On the point about GDP, Mr. Jha, India has, of course, been the fastest growing economy. So from that point of being the 10th largest economy, we have grown to now becoming the 5th largest economy. And of course, when you compare India's economic growth with the rest of the countries, including the United States and China, we are still faring well. Gaura, let me get in your point here on this. When we talk about job creation, the government has made significant investments when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to PLI schemes, or when it comes to investing in new age sectors like green energy, EVs. Well, we do have a Semiconductor India mission also going on. The government is looking at a Semiconductor India mission too, as far as that is concerned. But in your assessment, do you think job creation has kept up pace, and how do we compare ourselves, in the times that we find ourselves in, when there is global uncertainty, when there is a specter of, technology threatening job losses? How do you really rate India when it comes to job creation?
So one is job creation. The other question is the role of the government. How much can the government do in the arena of job creation? So I think the role of the government is to create an enabling environment and also create an environment of stability which will attract investment. And I think among all emerging markets, we can clearly say that India is on a stronger footing. If you look at the fiscal trajectory, for example, there's a lot of focus on how US government debt to GDP, fiscal deficit to GDP is an unsustainable path. But you look at the way the central government fiscal deficit, central government debt to GDP, state government fiscal deficit, state government debt to GDP, we are on a much more sustainable path, and we have navigated shocks such as COVID and even the other. For example, we have a current account deficit which is very narrow. It's less than 1% of GDP. So fostering an environment of macro stability, which will also attract investment, I think that has also been achieved. For example, gross FDI inflows into the country have actually picked up pace despite the fact that we have a global slowdown scenario. Also, the other part is, as one of the panelists was mentioning, the focus on capital expenditure, infrastructure, which are labor intensive. The other part is skilling. Obviously, it requires time given the scale of development that is required. But skilling is another major part that particular, reform focus is there. And I would also like to say that many of the reforms, such as GST, digitalization, even the UPI, the pace of the formalization of the economy is also picking up. And there's also been focus on reducing the number of rules and regulations that a company will need to comply with once they are in a formal sector. So all those are enabling reforms. Obviously, we need to have an environment which is also growth supportive. So for now, we are navigating a very uncertain environment globally.
Absolutely. We're navigating a very uncertain environment. And at this point, let me get in a news flash that's just coming in. Well, the World Bank has kept India's GDP growth forecast for FY26 unchanged at 6.3%. It says, and I quote, India would maintain the fastest growth rate amongst the world's largest economies at 6.3% in FY26. Mr. Jha, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. I think I'm going to take you back to 2014. And it's an important comparison that is very relevant because you asked me this question. At that point, the conversation was between India versus China, the dragon versus the tiger story. And go back to the GDP of 2014 when Mr. Modi became Prime Minister. It's not a political statement. It's a hard data point that I'm arguing on. India's GDP was around 2 trillion. China was close to around 9.8. Let's round it off to 10 trillion. You're today talking about China at over 20. Or nearly 20, and India at 4. So when you have a lower base, you're going to have a base effect coming into play. But an Indian growth rate at 6.2% does great disservice to this country. Let's kind of recognize that you still have around 60% or 800 million people in our country living on free rations. I mean, we still have a humongous population living in extreme poverty, even if the World Bank keeps changing the parameter for evaluation. I think Gaurav mentioned some point about, some things have changed. Look at the rural wages of India. And I'm saying so on data of the government. Rural or the informal sector, as we call it, the unorganized sector, where the bulk of our people live, has seen literally stagnant wages over the last 8-9 years. There has been a tremendous, the middle class, the big middle class is in big debt. People keep talking about middle class story. India's middle class is in debt today. Household debt has risen. There are problems. I think we get carried away by a stock market, a little hyped announcement. We got to get real about, are the Indian citizens better off? And while they may have been, there is bound to be some improvement. The truth is it is not paid off. And even post-COVID, let's look at the one truth that is again never discussed. I'm glad this is a business channel and we can. The recovery has been a K-shaped recovery even after the COVID pandemic. India is a country under severe income inequality.
Right, Mr.
It's only getting from bad to worse.
Right, Mr. Jha. Very valid point that you raised when it comes to income inequality and the wage gap that exists not just in rural areas but in urban areas as well, and that that is being felt by youngsters as well who are working in corporate. So Karan, let me come to you on that point. Why has the government not really been able to look at this issue wage gap with priority? If India's domestic consumption story has to keep up the momentum, wage gap essentially needs to be looked at, because you can't just depend on the 1% of population to buy your products and goods. You want the other ones to participate as well.
So, whenever an economy grows, there are going to be some pressing issues. Wealth inequality or income inequality has been a legacy issue passed on government after government. So we can't really, expect and pin down one government blaming for it. If anything, the Gini coefficient, and I can talk about all these things because it's a business channel, that has improved drastically. And it's a parameter for income inequality. So it will not change overnight. Of course, there's a lot more that needs to be done in here, but it's the private sector, it's the people who also need to step up to the plate here. I saw our friend Sanjay Jha talking nostalgically about 2014. Right. I must jog your memory back to 2014 when we were a part of the fragile five economies. We were struggling, reeling under inflation and lower growth. From there, we've come a long way. And when he compares himself to China, we were in no position to overtake China with hardly any digital infrastructure, with most of the population unbanked, with no tap water connections, no infrastructure of that quality. How could we have overtaken China? We are living in cuckoo's land if we say we would have overtaken China. No, we would have not. And there is a long way we need to go, but let's at least appreciate the fact that as far as the labor participation rate is concerned, we've come a long way, 12% rise. Female participation rate, another significant rise. 25 crore people pulled out of poverty. So yes, I agree that there is some constructive criticism to be made, there are some suggestions, but let's not lose
Yes.
sight of the fact that we are still growing at a rate faster than the world when there have been two major events, the Russia-Ukraine war, the COVID war, and we've
Yes.
managed our inflation well as well. Right now, the retail inflation is 3.16.
Yes.
We had double-digit inflation for close to 20 months back in the UPA years. So there has to be some perspective and context to the numbers. Then he talked about manufacturing. I must tell him that earlier, before 2014, 65% of our defense was imported from outside. Today, we are manufacturing 65% of our defense equipment right here. It's
Yes.
gone up to a point where we are exporting our defense equipment 30
Right.
times more, Sanjay, in the last 10 years compared to the previous 10 years.
Yes.
So there is a remarkable change
Yes.
that has happened. Of course, more needs to happen. I agree with him on that.
Karan, yes. So, Karan, much more needs to happen, and I will touch upon the points that you've mentioned here with respect to defense manufacturing and manufacturing overall, given the fact that, it's an important story. It's an important narrative that's being built by the BJP government, and as far as, manufacturing is concerned, whether it is related to semiconductors, electronics, or several other sectors like EVs. But let me get back to the point about, wage growth, Gaura. So as an economist, what would it really take for the government to bridge that wage gap? Of course, Karan was stating that, it's been a legacy problem. It's been a problem much like the problem of unemployment that's persisted during Congress years as well, in BJP years as well. So what kind of structural reforms need to be carried out so that this wage gap can be bridged? Because this is the number one challenge that at least the urban youth are facing. They can vocalize these concerns.
The trend in the wage growth that we are seeing, at least in the urban sector, it's a reflection of how listed corporate profitability is. So there is a slowdown in corporate profitability because there was a moderation in the
Right.
top line. So it's reflecting a business cycle that we are going through. Sometimes you go through slowdown cycles because we are against a slowing export scenario, trade tariffs, an aging economy. Domestically, we have seen a moderation in listed company profits, and that is reflecting in the way urban wage growth is evolving.
But Gaurav, let me interject you here. When you talk about all of these factors, these are recent factors. The global economic headwinds, geopolitically what's happening, these are recent factors. I mean, this has been a legacy issue. Wage gap is something as a policy, it's not really been looked at by both the BJP-led and Congress-led governments. What kind of interventions, policy interventions are needed for that to be filled up?
So just to give you a context, if you look at FY24, FY23, we'd actually seen a surge in real urban wage growth. And we did see a corresponding pickup in the formal sector. For example, we saw very strong FMCG urban wage growth. In the rural side, the data from the RBI website is indicating that rural wage growth in nominal terms is currently growing at 6%. In terms of what we can do, wage growth is a direct function of productivity. I would say one key reform that India can look towards is raising the productivity in agriculture, especially allied agriculture. Nearly 50% or slightly less than 50% of our population is employed in agriculture. Boosting the productivity of agriculture, especially in the allied side, in the food processing side, that would definitely help increase the per capita value added, which will directly translate into wages. And on the urban side, the ease of doing business, which has been a focus over the last couple of years, reducing the number of regulations, labor laws that a company has to basically adhere to, so that you can get scale. As you get scale of production, productivity per person picks up. Again, that will directly feed into pickup in wage growth. All that takes time, and it has been under focus. For example, if I take you to the agriculture, you'll actually see that the value of the allied part of agriculture has been growing.
So, Gaurav, when we speak about agriculture, well, this year is supposed to be delivering good returns so far as the agri sector is concerned on account of monsoons, but that's a separate conversation to be had. Let me come back to you, Mr. Jha. Now, Gaura has raised this point that, private companies' profits have been dipping and, wage gap essentially is a function of companies not really matching wage needs and, the parameters that exist currently. This was something that was also brought up by V. Ananta Nageshwaran, the CEA of the country. He said that while in March 2024, companies' profits reached record highs, but the salaries did not move as fast, when it really comes to sort of giving out the monies to employees. But the question is, should it be just the corporate sector that should pitch in when it comes to, bridging this wage gap?
No, to be honest with you, if you're looking at job creation, it has to really come from manufacturing and the private sector. The government can only do so much with the reservations and, positive discrimination, etc. It's a tragedy, really, that reservations
Mr.
is a hot political
Jha,
potato.
the question is on wage gaps, on bridging the wage gap.
Yeah, I think the private sector has to step up. One of the reasons is you'll find the C-suite in India gets excessively overpaid, while the average people across the rung, are frankly worse off. This is the problem in all capitalist economies who are, kind of driven by this obsession for free market obsession. They kind of miss the plot. It's happening in America. It's happening here. But there are 2 points that are critical. And that worries me as a citizen of my country. The lowering of confidence in India's economic robustness. Look at the number of dollar millionaires who are leaving India over every year. There are thousands of them leaving every year. I'm going to add to that the number of people who have given up citizenship in our country to live abroad. That tells you of a huge loss of confidence for whatever reason. Environment, ease of doing business, living in a very harmonious society. These are things we cannot ignore. We don't live in an economy. We live in a society. A fundamental reason why many people are probably moving abroad. The second, equally important, is the fact that there is been in India, and this is not some political speech I'm making, a very serious kind of kleptocracy which has crept in, which we call as crony capitalism. And let me tell you, crony capitalism or this whole national champion model that Mr. Modi is promoting, it cannot work in a country of our size, diversity and talent. And invariably, it's going to hit your growth, like it or not. And the third point, you can see it in the net FDI. Net FDI is down 96%, which tells you that end of day, to be an attractive market for even the foreigners, you need to give them the confidence that as an economy and more important, even as a country, you're going to be providing a less of regulatory cholesterol that Gaura mentioned. And you are truly going to create an environment where people can invest without fear or some kind of a law or taxation, which takes you back into the dark ages. So there are problems here, and I think we need a lot of things to fix, honestly.
Absolutely. But, Mr. Jha, I'd like to disagree with you a little bit here. Of course, you have your opinion, but, when it comes to sort of, job creation and millionaires, etc., well, India's startup sector has created so many millionaires. There is a separate story of job creation that's coming in from the startup sector. India is now the third largest startup sector in the world. And of course, that is getting boosted. So far as foreign investments are concerned, yes, they've seen some sort of a dip. But even as we speak, we do have the cabinet ministers meeting with representatives from the EU. EU is looking at India as a critical part of its supply chains, and so are several other countries amidst disruptions. But let me come to you, Karan, and talk about the very important piece that you talked about, and of course all the guests here touched upon as well, and that is essentially about manufacturing as a sector. Now, that did witness some sort of a dip in the quarter gone by, and there are schemes like PLI schemes, there are subsidy schemes that are going on in several sectors, which have also attracted investments, by the way. S&P Global has also hailed India's manufacturing sector. But why is the Congress party critical or the opposition critical when it comes to not acknowledging these realities? For example, the semiconductor sector, the Congress party was given this opportunity way back in the late 90s. They did not really seize this opportunity. In fact, manufacturing as a whole, as a story, was missed by the Congress government.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. I think they should rise above politics in supporting this thing because right now, most of the companies, we saw Apple Today, 15% of their iPhone production is happening in India. We are exporting so many things in terms of technology right now. And we saw the other day Donald Trump threatening pretty much Tim Cook not to manufacture in India anymore. So there are lots of plants that are coming up here. You pointed out about semiconductors. One thing, when you talk about wage inequality and income inequality, one big story that we're all missing out is the agriculture. I think the day we see reforms in agriculture, because it employs close to 48% of our workforce and contributes as little as 19% to the GDP. So, this is one place that needs reform. Unfortunately, they were sacrificed at the altar of politics last time around. The three reforms that were, doled out by the Modi government that were later taken back, if we can have a different version of that, but at least liberalize that sector, because that is where if you are going to intervene in the market too much, then it's going to create trouble. You have to facilitate. That's what the role of the government is. In agriculture, we've yet not facilitated that. We need to bring in the same reforms that in 1991, the way we liberalized our economy, we need to liberalize our agriculture sector. We'll have more food processing units come up. We'll see the laborers getting their wages up. Let the private sector come into agriculture. Let them contribute there. There's a reason why 80 crore people today are still getting ration. Our friend Sanjay should know this. Back in 2012, the Supreme Court ordered the Agriculture Minister Sharad Pawar at that point of time that food is rotting in the godowns. But you need to distribute them. There is no sense of it rotting. Sharad Pawar refused. This government followed up on that. We cannot have food rotting in our godowns. We need a better structure, and for that,
Karan, so when you
partner with the private players.
Right. So when you talk about agriculture as a sector, right. So when you talk about agriculture as a sector, and these reforms need to be brought about and policies need to support the sector, is 11 years too less a time to perhaps bring about these kind of reforms that you're talking about with respect to the agri sector?
No, it isn't, and that's why in 2020, when those reforms were pitched, at that point of time, we saw the kind of protests we saw. And it's unfortunate that the government buckled under pressure. They shouldn't have. Perhaps for, keeping their political calculations in mind. And the opposition played an extremely destructive role. Don't forget, the same three reforms pretty much were there in the Congress 2019 manifesto. But the Congress opposed it and the government buckled under pressure. I think what we need right now is a similar rehash or a milder version of those reforms. At least start liberalizing the agriculture sector before we lose our water table. Today, in the garb of MSPs, what we are seeing is farmers only obsessed with wheat and rice, depleting our resources, food rotting in godowns. We need crop diversification. We need private players. We need food processing units to come up. That is a solution we need to come together on rather than politic over it.
Right. Right, and that is something that, probably the government needs to look at with priority. But Mr. Jha, when we talk about, manufacturing, and I'll go back to that point, of course, there are several sectors which have shown, remarkable progress when it comes to manufacturing. However, as a percentage of the GDP, it still is somewhere between 12 to 13%. Of course, the government wants to take it up till about 23% or 25%. But I want to understand from you, why did the Congress government, the previous government, really miss out on that manufacturing bus?
Let me tell you something. When you're in power for 11 years and then you have to talk legacy problems, it's basically an admission of a complete failure of governance. I mean, frankly speaking, 3 times in government and twice with an absolute majority on its own, Mr. Modi's government, frankly speaking, has underperformed. That's a hard truth. And I'll give you a couple of examples here. See, the truth is that to develop India, to kind of get a cohesive policy, the government had to truly look at increasing the size and the scope of private investment. You still have people today sitting on excess capacity. Go back, Sumita, to the announcement in 2019 by Nirmala Sitharaman, India's finance minister, who gave India's corporate sector a tax waiver aggregating approximately 150,000 crores in 2019. And what was said to us then? It will boost investment, it will boost jobs. If you multiply 150 by 6 and you compound it, it's over 10 lakh crores that has been foregone from India's could have been budgetary earnings in tax. And where is the investment? Where is the growth? So one of the principal factors behind that is that the country has not been able to excite the economy and not just the foreign investors, but increase your local demand. Why are we not talking about the fact that this government has only focused on the supply side of boosting the economy? You can ask Gaura that question. She's an economist. She may have a view on it. India needed actually a more demand-driven, shall we say, impetus and economic growth. You have people today, you have big FMCG companies, you have many people.
But Mr. Jha, this is essentially what global economists and ratings agencies, by the way, Moody's and S&P Global and Fitch, all of them have downgraded the US economy on the fact that, there is too much debt, etc. But these very agencies, foreign institutional investors, they talk about India's domestic growth story, and which is why we did see how FIIs actually have come back to the Indian stock markets. They are investing in the India story. So when you talk about investments that are being made by the private sector, I'm just going to talk about the numbers that we've received from the semiconductor sector. Well, this is a nascent sector. Till about a few years ago, there was absolutely nothing related to the semiconductor sector here in India. But Micron, which is a US-based company, it is setting up an ATMP unit. And it has invested $2.75 billion. We've seen investments coming from the Tata Group as well, from small-time companies as well. And of course, there is a company that is called Renaissance, and the government is looking at another subsidy scheme. So another subsidy scheme cannot happen if there is no demand, if there are no takers, etc. Karan also brought up that entire point about Apple looking at keeping its supply chains intact and betting big on the India story. They are coming up with newer stores as well to bet on the domestic demand. But Gaura, let's get it from you. When we talk about manufacturing, and if India is aiming to to take that sector to 23% of India's GDP, which at present is 12%, what should be looked at? Of course, there was this question about, we are not adding value, we're just collating, just compiling, and just assembling. Would you agree with that argument? Because, value addition happens at a later stage. That is one point. The other point that I want to understand from you is that what kind of policy interventions are needed so that, manufacturing as a sector of the Indian economy can be given a push? It's seen some kind of a correction in the quarter gone by.
Again, it's a function of the kind of environment we are working in. The government role is to play an enabler, and that they have done. They have created an environment of stability. We have seen stability on the currency front. We have seen stability on the inflation front. Macro-prudential norms have been implemented. Macro stability indicators are in check. We are considered relatively a stable, strong economy compared to other emerging markets. And while we have so much focus going on manufacturing, what we've completely missed is the success that we have had as an economy on the services side, which is more than 60% of, which is the majority of the value added. And the fact that India, especially in the software services export side, has a comparative advantage. Manufacturing, a lot of it is a part of timing also. For example, when China was able to make the manufacturing push, it was operating in a global economy which was growing at a much faster rate and a much younger economy. We are now operating in a place where you have slower global growth and you have already well-established players such as China. We must play to our strength. And definitely developing manufacturing, we have to do that. But also the services side where we have a competitive advantage, we should focus on that too. So in terms of what can boost employment, skilling.
Right. So Gaura, when you talk about, how the economy was largely services oriented and manufacturing was perhaps, non-existent. But are you satisfied today at the rate at which manufacturing is growing in the country?
Definitely, we can definitely do better. But also you have to see there is a very close linkage between manufacturing sector growth and how our goods exports perform. It's very difficult to have strong manufacturing growth when you have a global slowdown, you have such extreme level of uncertainty. But what we can do is, one, ease of doing business, which is already being focused on, reducing the number of compliance regulation, which is already being worked on, improving the scale of output. once you get scale of production, you can increase per capita productivity. And also, but in the end, it is skilling and education which will which will enable the ability to absorb the working age population. Right now, India is one of the few countries, I think one of the only countries in the world, which for the next 20 to 25 years will continue to see their working age population grow. And our ability to absorb that will be a function of not just the number of jobs created, but also making sure that the people that are entering the workforce have the adequate skill. And it is a job required not just for the government, but also for the private sector. It has to be a joint coordination between the two. The government has to create an environment of enabling.
Absolutely. It has to be a joint effort by the private sector, by the government as well. The government has to look at skilling and training its workforce so that its workforce can be ready for jobs of the future, even as technological disruptions are happening at the speed of light, not just in India, but globally as well. If India wants to become a key player globally, whether it is in terms of its economic prowess or being a tech leader, those are some of the points that it has to consider. And gentlemen, thank you very much. And Gaura, thank you very much for joining us here and sharing